Hello, I think it's working. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome for this second online EPRS book talk. We have today the privilege to welcome Michael Cashman, who will present his memoir, one of them, published by Bloomsbury in February this year. Hello, Michael in London.
Hi, how are you, Etienne?
Very well, thank you. And we have with us today Maria WALSH, who was elected to the European Parliament exactly 1 year ago. Hello, Maria in Ireland.
Hello, thanks for having us.
And welcome. And I would like also to welcome all participants from Brussels and abroad. And I know that many of you are not in Brussels today. They are at home, working from home or having leisure at home. A few technical announcements. This event will last for 1 hour. You are automatically all muted. I'm speaking about the attendees. So this is the rule. But you can participate to the Q&A by just putting your questions on the little button that is on the right of your screen. And if we have time, we will also maybe allow questions at the end, like live questions, if it's possible. Michael, one of them is a story of your life, I would say your many lives, as an actor on stage and screen, as a pioneer of LGBT rights and activism, as a member of the European Parliament for not less than 15 years, and more recently as a member of the House of Lords. And the book recounts these many lives that you have lived. It was very warmly welcomed by both readers and the press. And I'd just like to read two quotes. The first quote is from Sheila Hancock, who is a famous actor in the UK. Michael Cashman describes his journey from a cruel Dickensian, Charles Dickens, childhood to the dignity of the House of Lords with brutal honesty. I was shocked, amused, and deeply moved by this life of a brave, good man.
Oh.
And The Guardian said about your book, it's a powerful account of public life about love and loss. And I can only confirm your book is not less than 400 pages, but it reads very well, even for a Frenchman. It is a memoir, but it reads like a novel with changes in direction, juicy anecdotes. It's at the same time very personal, and it's also a precious account of public life, both in the UK and in the European Parliament. So, Michael, what I'd like to ask you first is, why writing a book now in your life? Why is it important to write your memoir?
Okay, Etienne, before I answer that question, I want to say it's a real privilege to be on here with you, but in particularly Maria, who in her year there has already made a difference, but she's made a difference to so many people coming out as early as she did and with such a high profile. And it's a real privilege to share this platform with her and to share our common endeavors. Why write this book? I've got a copy as well. I suppose I've had a life that shocks me, really. A life I never imagined. I grew up very close to here on the River Thames. My dad was worked on the docks. My mother was an office cleaner. And I came from a very poor background. And when I was born, as the book recalls, my life was mapped out for me. My dad went down and put my name at the docks so that when I left school at the age of 15, I would become a docker. If my mum had had daughters, she would have taken them office cleaning with her. I think my mum must have known I was gay from a very early age because she took me office cleaning with her very early. But I wanted to set out my life with all the darkness that has happened to me as well. Because I think unless you paint an honest picture, it's like a mosaic. If you leave out those darker colors, people know there's something missing. And I thought it was equally important to say, look at what's happened to me, and actually you can become your real self. You can do it. And the real impetus was losing the love of my life, Paul. We were together for 31 years, and he died nearly 6 years ago. And I wanted to put our life, and believe me, there are some surprises and some shocks in there. I wanted to put our life with all its difficulties and the problems that we had and the joy, the utter joy that we had. But more importantly, the love. And I'll finish on this. As you know, I'm not religious. I was brought up a Catholic and I very quickly became an atheist. But one of the nuns locally who does a lot of community work, she read my book. And I said, "Sister, did you read it all?" And she said, of course I read it all. And I said, "Everything?" She said, "Yes." And she then looked at me and she said, "I defy anyone to read this book and not understand what sexual orientation is and not understand what it is to love." So that's why I've written it, really. I've had an unimaginable life, darkness and light, but unimaginable.
That's a great introduction, Michael. Thank you very much for that. I was struck by the title that you chose for your book, one of them. And when reading the book, I tried to find explanation for that. And I found two explanations. One, first, where you comment by your mother. It was your mother saying you're one of them, because you were dancing at a party at EastEnders, and then later in your life, I think it could be also a more political stand, reaction to the "one of us" used by the time Prime Minister Thatcher. So, can you tell us about this anecdote of your childhood, where your mum said you're one of them?
Well, we lived on this amazing housing estate right here in the East End of London, and I knew at the earliest age that I was different. I knew that girls were my friends and boys were the common enemy that we could fancy. And so I was always, because of something that happened to me, something quite dark when I was 7 years old. The way I got over that was to become an extrovert. And I used to put on shows and dance. And my mum said to me once, she said, "Dance for your Auntie Eileen." And my Aunt Eileen, she was my favourite aunt because she had this trick of being able to take her teeth out. Well, someone at my age, that was magical. And so they put on a record and I danced and kicking my legs everywhere. And they were laughing and laughing. And I heard my mum say, "I think he's one of them." And I knew immediately that it was different, the way she said it. And inside I froze, I panicked. And I was saying, don't laugh, stop laughing, stop laughing. And I knew that they knew I was different. And of course, in the East End of London, if somebody was gay or queer, as we said then, we didn't have that language. They used to say, "I think he's one of them." So that's the story. And thankfully, I was never, as Margaret Thatcher called, one of hers. She used to say, is he one of us?" I'm from the other party. So no, I certainly wasn't one of us. I've always been one of them, I suppose.
Your life as an actor started very early, so you had this talent as a kid, and your publisher shared with us a few pictures, and I like to show some of these pictures and you to comment on them. So if I can ask Mirko just to show the first picture of you as Oliver.
Yes, well, you see, I'm 12 years old there, and I was discovered at my secondary modern school at the age of 11, impersonating a black jazz singer called Eartha Kitt, and I was in complete drag, but no dark makeup. And a talent scout spotted me, and miraculously, within 10 weeks, I was appearing in Oliver in the West End of London, and then I played Oliver. And this was a personal appearance. We used to go and do personal appearances, and there I am in a school uniform. You can't see it, but the colour is mauve. Can you imagine walking around the East End of London here in this mauve jacket. It was like signaling, I'm a gay boy, come and beat me up. Because I went very quickly to a stage school. So that's that picture.
That's okay. And the next one is later, much later in your life. You are an established actor with a very famous figure.
Yes, well, let me just tell everyone, the person on the right is Elizabeth Taylor. I just, and look at me, look at my hair. So this is a film called Z and Co, also known as X, Y, and Z, starring Elizabeth Taylor, Susanna York, Michael Caine. There were only 7 of us in the film. And I just made a film previous to that with David Hemmings, a big star at that time. And I had a lead role, and this was a film I did with her. And I won't spoil the story, it's in the book, but there's a wonderful story behind this photograph and how it came to be taken. And again, you can't see it, it's black and white, but Elizabeth Taylor had the most amazing violet colored eyes, stunningly beautiful.
Right. And then we come to a little press cutting that changed your life and that changed also the perception of gay people in the UK. It's an extract from the newspaper in '89.
Yes.
Can you comment on this one?
I can. If people feel that the headline is offensive, that they should see some of the others that were used by the tabloid press. We have to remember, I went into a show called EastEnders, and it had at the time 11 million viewers per episode. We went out 3 times a week, and they decided to introduce the first ever in a show like this a non-stereotypical gay character called Colin, and I played Colin. He was a very ordinary guy, and so it was really brave of the BBC. I had a young lover, and we had there were calls when I went into the show for in Parliament as to why were they putting a gay man, a gay character, in a show when AIDS and HIV was swirling around like the gay plague. That's what they called it here in the press. And so what we need to remember is this was the second kiss, and there were calls for the show to be taken off air, for it to be axed, unless they got rid of my character. They didn't, and during my time in that show, and I'll finish on this, during my time in that show, the Thatcher government introduced the first anti-lesbian and gay and bisexual law in 100 years, and I joined the campaign, the public campaign against it. And out of that, I found my activist voice. I thought, no, you can't do this to us. You will not do this to us. From that, we founded in the United Kingdom the Stonewall Group, which campaigns for legal equality and social justice for LGBT people.
Right. During all these years, you were not only like a witness of the radical change in the society, but you were also really an actor as regard to the gay community. And decriminalization, the first gay pride in London in 1979, in which you took part, anti-discrimination laws, same-sex marriage, etc. And when you look back from now, where you are now in your life, when you look back at all this, what were for you the key moments of this change, the major steps?
I think the major steps, I remember going on my first gay pride march in 1979, and there were about 500 of us. We had more police protecting us, or maybe they thought we were going to suddenly throw ourselves at the onlookers. I think the major changes, I'm not looking at partial decriminalization in 1967. I think the major change came when they introduced this anti-gay law, and we decided that we would fight back. We didn't win. The Section 28 went ahead, and it became law. But because of that law being thrown at us whilst we were dealing with AIDS and HIV, we, I think, reacted in a way as so much as to say, if you want a fight, we'll give you a fight. And that was, I think, the organized beginning of the campaign for legal equality. and we still fight because no matter what we've got to make sure we protect it and extend it so that when we travel, our rights travel with us. But Etienne, I cannot finish on this without saying the changes that we've seen in the United Kingdom don't come from my generation. They come from thousands of generations ago. Women and men who stood up and gave sometimes their liberty, their life, and everything that we take for granted. They stood up and they said, you cannot do that. It's to them that we owe the debt for what we have now and what we wish to extend.
I think in your life we can see a continuum between your engagement as an actor and then as an activist, and then a natural move to politics, and then you come into politics. And you choose Europe, you choose the European Parliament, you were elected in 1999. So why turning in formal politics, and why joining the European Parliament and come to Brussels? How did it come?
Okay, well, first of all, when I was asked to stand for the nomination within the British Labour Party, I said no, because I said, no, people like me don't go to politics. I didn't have a proper education. I didn't go to university. And it was Paul, my wonderful Paul, who said, of course you can do it. He said, you shout at the television often enough, of course you can do it. And so I got the nomination eventually in 1998, stood in the 99 election. And it was always going to be Europe for me, because I could see that Europe in many ways, although it wasn't advanced at all on LGBT rights, it recognized that we could achieve so much by coming together, by agreeing to pool our clout in order to negotiate and effect change. And also, I was the legislator for the Schengen Border Code. So I believe in freedom of movement. I believe that we are stronger with other countries. We're weaker on our own. And so that was 1999. And I'd seen some of the changes that had happened in the European Parliament, the motions and resolutions supporting LGBT people. And I knew it was the place for me. So 15 years there, again, as I say, initially I was only going to do 10, but it's such a wonderful job, and you gain so much by working with people rather than against them, that I did the 15 years. It was Europe was the natural home for me, and I still consider myself European, regardless of what Britain does about the lunacy, the national suicide of Brexit.
Right. In the Parliament, you had many roles. You were a member of the Committee on Liberties, LIBE, so known as LIBE, where you fought for anti-discrimination, for human rights. You were vice chair of the Petition Committee, successively chair of the Delegation for Relations with South Africa, and chair of the Conference of the Delegation Chair. And you also co-created the Intergroup LGBT at the time. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you chaired it for a while. So you worked a lot for equality and diversity. And over these 15 years, what do you remember most, and what was the most important for you?
What do I remember most? I remember enlargement being seen as the most amazing opportunity to put equality issues on the agenda. I named the countries in the book, but there was one country where we went to, and prior to them joining, and I reminded them that they had to deal with issues, women's equality, equality around what I call Article 13, which is now Article 19, equality, equal rights. And I outlined them. And I said to the parliamentarians, I said, if you don't want to do it, and it's unpopular, then blame us, blame Europe. But what I saw was that you could work with people, you could win the arguments. And enlargement enabled us, because of the Treaty of Amsterdam and the Treaty of the European Community, allowed us to put these rights, equal rights, freedom of movement, which is as important as the whole equality issues, that we put them full centre of the enlargement debate, and we achieved changes that would come, but we achieved them perhaps in advance. And as I said earlier, now it's the Parliament's role to defend them, particularly when we look at some countries where there are worrying developments like Hungary. And Hungary is not the only place.
Thank you. Now I turn to you, Maria. You are very new in the European Parliament. You were elected in last year. You came last year in the European Parliament. A few words about you. You graduated from the Griffith College in Dublin with a BA in journalism and visual media in 2009. You went on to a career in television production and creative management, and in 2014 you won the Rose of Tralee, and in the following week you revealed that you're gay. So that's your story. Among your responsibilities in the EP, you are a member of the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs, and of course you are engaged on LGBTQI issues. Michael, permit me to say so, you are from another generation. Looking back at this decade of transformation for the LGBTB communities and Michael's roles, how do you judge and how do you see these many changes and evolutions?
Oh, well, thank you. And just as Michael said in his opening words, I'm so grateful to be here. When we talk about events and online calls and meetings, I can safely say with no hesitation and love in my heart that this has probably is the most anticipated and exciting event that I've been a part of. So fortunately a part of since I became elected in last summer. And yeah, just I'm sitting there and I'm listening to Michael. Like, keep talking. He's abundance of knowledge and insight and balance, which is what we need. But your question around how far we've come and I hope I'm picking this up right, Etienne. Where we are now and where we've been and all those things. We're, as Michael has said, we're indebted to the generations that have come before us. We're indebted to Michael, and just listening to Michael's opening words around I'm one of them, or we are a part of that group, or the uncomfortableness of accepting another is still language we hear today. I've heard it plenty of times too, and I guess from where we are right now to where I anticipate and want us to be in the future is less of that unsaid words or unsaid feelings for fellow humans, not just LGBTQI community members, but just that there is no difference regardless of color, creed, orientation, accent, and everything else that makes us human. It would be amiss of me, and Michael no doubt will have a lot more knowledge in terms of the back history where we are right now. This event couldn't have come at a better time considering what we see in the United States right now. And the waves of injustices that is coming from across the US into Europe and beyond. There's so many parallels between what I've read about in the Stonewall riots to what we see now with Black Lives Matter. And in essence, you're wondering, why are we repeating history? But in fact, so many parts of our history weren't dealt with when they should have been. And now it erupts, and I'm so elated. In many ways, if COVID wasn't here right now, I'd be on a plane heading to the United States to march with people, or up in Dublin where a huge march happened on Monday. There's so much goodness happening, and unfortunately, oppression, prejudice, divisive language is still present. But it just goes to show you when, as Michael said just now, we are stronger with each other, and you see that, you feel that. I do want to stress, though, from a European Parliament side, while we've come a long way as a new MEP, I get frustrated. I get disappointed that we have only marriage equality in 13 member states. We still have no hate speech law in 5 member states. So there's still so much work to be done. But from where we are to where we were, to the utopia land that I believe in and dream of where we will be, we will have generations that will wake up, walk out their front door, bring them whole selves to work, turn over to the person they love, not whether it's a boy or a girl. And we will get there, and we will get there because we have the foundations of Michael. We have the love of Michael and his beautiful husband, and we have so many examples of goodness out there. We just need to connect the dots. I hope I answered your question and I didn't go off on a tangent.
Many thanks, and more than that, because I'm reading the chat now. Colleagues and friends are putting questions on the feature here where it's possible to put questions, and one of them is about the rise of racism in the US and the concerns that both of you can have about this situation. Maria, you briefly mentioned it, but maybe Michael, if you want to react on the situation in the US right now.
Well, Maria put it absolutely right, and it's essential part of my belief that we have to always stand in the shoes of the other. And what is happening in the USA at the moment reminds us that hatred and prejudice never goes away. It never goes away. So long as we stand back and say nothing, then we endorse it. And so what I am really empowered by is the number of people who have said, you cannot do that. It goes back to what I call the thousands of generations. And at the heart of Europe, people must never forget that Europe was born out of the ashes of the Second World War, the ashes of people's hopes, people's dreams, and the ashes from crematoriums that were dotted across Europe. And we came together and we said, it will never happen again. We will never turn our head away again when a country or a person or a group are scapegoated and targeted. We must stand with everybody else. The one thing that we have in common is our difference. We must celebrate their difference if we're to celebrate ours. And so Black Lives Matter because all lives matter. And if people don't understand equality, they don't even have to go into a dictionary to read it. They can Google it and they will get the definition of equality. And I'll finish on this because you know me, I go on forever and ever. But with one person, I am as strong as the weakest. I am as equal as the person most denied. We stand side by side by side by side. And in America, people are standing side by side by side by side. And sadly, the president is not. But history will recall this, and the ballot coming up, the American people have a chance to choose their future.
Thank you very much, Michael. Just to go back to you, Maria, something that is very striking with Ireland, your country, is that 5 years ago, and it's almost day to day, 5 years ago, the same-sex marriage law was introduced by a popular vote, and there were not many countries where we had such a popular vote. And if I recall the result, it was 64% voting in favor. I think it's quite extraordinary, and there has been a big evolution in the Irish society that could lead to such a result. Looking back, how do you assess this change of society? What were the changes that made it possible to what is almost a revolution and a very peaceful one?
Yeah, absolutely. It just goes to show again what we've seen in history, what we've seen in the United States of America is no different in terms of a cohort of people, probably a small number of people over years and years began to start a very difficult dialogue of equality. and unity and what that actually looks like, and slowly built to what my generation and generations ahead of us can now feel accepted into a country that would be still quite dominant of the Catholic Church, and how we come from that. Over the course of the marriage referendum campaign, and I think it was a bit of a serendipitous moment, stars certainly aligned for me personally in that I was crowned the International Rose of Tralee in August of 2014. In 2015, it's a one-year volunteer ambassador role, and as an openly gay, very comfortable woman with who she is and where she's coming from, I got to be a part of that little piece of change, because people could see a woman with tattoos and a dress and heels on a stage talking about very comfortably about her backstory, and I say that as I'm a very small, minute piece of the overall historical movement that we experienced here in 2015. But you would have had groups. You would have had groups frustrated that their children weren't accepted into society. You would have had groups of older generations feeling that hiding their love in the back doors, the back alleys of nightclubs and bars, or having fake wives or husbands being talked about at work. Like, this is what happened, and in many countries, this is still happening. I think in some sense, and I looked at the marriage referendum that we experienced here in Ireland with over 63.5% vote as something historical, but was a stepping stone. So we are now looking 5 years on of, well, how far we've actually come in trans rights. Why is there still a waiting list for our citizens to transition? Why isn't there more supports in IVF for rainbow families, or easier adoption access to rainbow families? Or how can we equip a young person still, even after the marriage referendum, to sit at their table and look their mums or dads or whomever in the eye and say, this is me, we have a long way to go, but we certainly took that international spotlight and made, I hope other countries feel it is possible, that the light is still on for everywhere else. But from my side, when I experience, or I've lived through that piece of history, then you go into the likes of the European Parliament, and I would have seen waves of social groups of all ages rally behind the marriage equality bill that we passed in 2015. And you sit in the Parliament and you hear derogatory terms, or you hear the us and them divisive language, or you hear a whole citizen can't bring themselves to wherever they are. Or as Michael had alluded to earlier, you don't feel that I live in Ireland as an equal citizen. Well, why can't I travel across the European Union and bring my rights with me? That's not the case. So I think as Irish citizens, our expectation is everybody in the click of a finger, because we got there, everybody else has to get there. So over the course of the 5 years, we've learned to, I certainly have learned to accept that not everybody's on the same stepping stone as you, but you certainly have a space to lead into that. And my final point, because like Michael, hence the reason why we probably can't do this too often, because me and Michael will continue on chatting for days on end, that from what we passed in the marriage referendum, from individual storytelling, from the connecting that I, as a human being, deserve the exact same rights as a straight human being, and so many collective voices we were able to develop through a very an amazing LGBTQI activist in Catherine Sapone, who's a minister for children in Ireland. We were able to develop an LGBTQI youth strategy, one of its first of its kind, to really look at how to support our younger people coming out of that. So there's a couple of different steps, but we belong. I mean, in Ireland, we're only 40 years. I think last year we celebrated our 40th anniversary of decriminalising homosexuality. there's so many parts of rural Ireland and urban cities and centres here in Ireland that still are uncomfortable with who they are and where they're coming from. We still have the stories of my husband or my wife, and that individual doesn't feel comfortable, and around that is mental health support. So we've a long way to go, but what we experienced 5 years ago as a country certainly put pressures on Northern Ireland to follow suit, and certainly continues to put pressure on other countries to look at a citizen as a whole person.
Etienne,
Yes,
if you
please, Michael.
You'll allow me, because Maria's touched on something really important. We should, and this is to remind ourselves in the United Kingdom, that there is still much to do. When same-sex marriage was introduced into the Republic of Ireland, they leapt ahead of people living in Northern Ireland, where there was still not marriage equality. And it took marriage equality. It had to be introduced by Parliament in Westminster. Equally, women didn't have equal rights across the United Kingdom, because women in Northern Ireland didn't have the right to choose whether to have an abortion or not. So the leadership that was shown, certainly on same-sex marriage and on trans issues, by my cousins in Ireland, because my family originally come from Ireland, although I think we got there via Spain. But the issue of trans rights, the trans defamation happening in my country at the moment is terrifying. That it's being done by some lesbians, gay men, and bisexuals, and indeed some transsexuals, is deeply shameful and reprehensible. The government promised that it would reform the Gender Recognition Act. We used to lead the world on this. Now we're falling behind. And I have heard utterances from government ministers that suggest that they will not positively reform the Gender Reform Act, but they will actually diminish some rights. There's going to be a huge battle ahead. But I say to the UK government, we have the guts for that battle. I will not stand and see the rights of others taken away from them. Because again, European history reminds us, if you stand there and do nothing, then eventually they come for you. So putting those trans issues central, and women's rights central, race, equality, all of those, they must be there on the landscape with the rest of us. I go on far too long.
No, and just to add in there, Etienne, sorry. But when you talk about the first steps in equality, and as Michael alluded to earlier, the union was established out of the ashes of horrendous bloodshed. In Ireland in 1973, when I go to schools, I asked people I asked students, where do you think the European Union came from for Ireland? And they're like, well, I guess it's because easier Erasmus Plus programs or better trade deals. And I was like, but do you realize by us joining in 1973, the union forced us, luckily and fortunately for women and those that believed in women's rights, to look at our laws around women quitting their jobs after they got married. So they revolutionized the way women were accepted into society. Much like you have revolutions going on right now over the course of the last couple of days in the US, now completely different context, but around the same umbrella, under the same umbrella of equality. So bit by bit, we're getting there, but boy, bloody hell, Michael, why is it taking so long? And then my next thing is, unfortunately, as Michael has said, history repeats itself. And we've seen this. So you see this in the US right now. We see in Hungary, and I'm very outspoken, even though I'm in the same party as the Hungarian party in terms of the EPP. But we see little changes, little subtle changes, and back steps into equality. And we have to be aware, and it's not just parliamentarians. People have to be aware where fake news comes from, where factual dialogue gets stirred from, and we have to be so vigilant, because now we'll wake up in a society in 2024 and we won't recognize the union, because it would have shifted and changed right before our eyes.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think added into that, we have COVID, and here in the United Kingdom we have Brexit. Under the mask, let's say the mud of Brexit, there'll be arguments about whether we should enforce employers to respect certain rights because the economy cannot sustain it. So we won't see a frontal attack on rights. It will be for other reasons, and it might be for public health reasons, and it might even be for, if not public health reasons, in terms of Brexit, for economic reasons. So we've got to be extremely vigilant.
There is a question that arrived that is addressed to both of you, but in particular to Michael, and I read the question: how can LGBT people in Western countries promote change and equality in countries where the discourse is dominated by a fear of gender ideology being imposed by the West? And that raises the question, Michael, you have been working a lot with South Africa, with the ACP at the time where they were in the parliament. How would you reply to that? So do you see a role for the EU because we have the Charter of Fundamental Rights, because we have several legal instruments, do you see a role for us in the world to defend equality and non-discrimination?
Absolutely, because all of our trade agreements have a human rights clause. And I always argued in the European Parliament and with the Commission and Council that we had to enforce all aspects of our agreement. And indeed, when we had I was working on the Cotonou Agreement, I always argued about the reinforcing and defending human rights and the sanctions that follow if countries do not. But I think more importantly, what we can do in our own countries is to raise it with our governments, raise it with our political parties, our political representatives, when something happens in another country that diminishes someone's rights or attacks them. That's the way we operate here in the United Kingdom. I'm always working with my counterpart in the House of Lords, raising the issue so that there is government pressure. Use the avenues through the rainbow networks of the multinationals, because then they're putting economic pressure. But more importantly, us individually or collectively supporting those NGOs on the ground in those countries, because them making the arguments for change have greater weight than when other politicians who are resistant can then say they're being imposed. So that's the approach I've always taken. But I think working with the corporate, the multinationals, ensuring that they uphold equal rights where they're operating, that they make the arguments with governments in other countries, that is an added bonus for us.
Thank you. I would like just to recall that this Parliament adopted also a resolution. I think it was in the 18th of December. That was the first one, if I'm not mistaken, under this term on the hate speech about LGBTI people. Right, but now I have a question that is a bit more funny, let's say, to you, Michael. Being an actor or being a politician, is there a difference? What is the difference? And what do you prefer?
Well, some people say when they see me standing up in the House of Lords that I'm still performing. If I'm honest, I prefer politics. I miss the friendship of acting. I miss the camaraderie, that single focus that you've got to get that play on. You've got to work with one another regardless of whether you actually like one another or you think somebody else is good or not so good. I miss all of that. But in politics, you can affect real change. My two wonderful members of staff, Bruno and Renaud, I know are listening, and they will remember this. One of the things that I had the opportunity to do because I was a politician was to be part of a small group that intervened to make sure that a young gay Iranian who was 16 years old was not sent back to Iran, where he would have been hung by his neck until he was dead. If to have that opportunity to be able to do something like that is a privilege that you carry with you for the rest of your life. I love politics, because European politics and in the House of Lords, it's the same. You work with other political parties, you work with other people, you compromise, and it's seen as positive, each gaining, so that we all move forward together, not pushing somebody behind. Yep.
Thank you. Let's look at two other pictures. And before doing so, I would like you, Michael, to read a bit of your book. It's page 375, and it's when you reach the end of your mandate of the parliament. It's the last days, the last hours, the last minutes, and when you leave the house. And it's a very precious memory, and I would like you to read a few lines of your book.
Okay. I'm going to cut really to the, on June the 17th in Brussels, I held a farewell party in my bare office. And friends from 15 years in the European Parliament came to say goodbye. Then I'm going to cut to the next bit. This is after the party. The Brussels office was empty, and my stuff was in boxes awaiting shipment to the United Kingdom. But Renaud and Bruno were still trying to hang on to things. Throw it all away, I kept saying. The work will speak for itself, or it won't. Throw it away. The wall outside our office was lined with posters of campaigns, hearings, and inquests from our years in the Parliament. I physically took the boys into the corridor and made them help me take the posters down. Before we began, we took a photo, a memory of 15 years worth of activism. And I took down the first poster, pro-choice, which over the years have been ripped and torn by our opponents as they passed. Down came the trans posters, LGBT+, the environment, public health, and one by one, they all went into the bin. I knew our legacy would not be remembered by the posters, but hopefully by the lasting change we had helped to effect. Then the day arrived, my last as a member of the European Parliament. That morning, I left the hotel and walked into the building that I had loved working in for the last decade and a half. It was quiet, almost deserted. I had already said my farewells to the wonderful staff who worked in the bars and the restaurants, the attendants who brought us coffee in committee, and the admin staff. Now I was saying goodbye to the building and the silent memories. I collected my few things from the office on the 13th floor, took one last look, and left without looking back. The departure had never been more decisive. Renaud came with me to the ground floor. We hugged, and masking my sadness at not working with him anymore, I muttered that I would speak with him on the phone before climbing into a car and leaving. I found my mobile phone and called Paul. That's it, Babs. I've left. Now it was going to be just him and me. Me and him. And there he is in that photo, his arms around me. And on the lovely boat, lovely ship, we've been out for the day, heading back to Key West. And I warn the readers, there's some naughty stories in the book about Key West and Santa Claus. There's some wonderful, but that picture sums it all up. I just wish he was hugging me now.
Thank you. We go for the next picture. Thank you very much, Michael, for this. It's a couple of years. No, it's not a couple of years later. It's actually a few days after Paul had left, and it's you being in another parliament, the House of Lords, so a new step in your life. And can you tell us something about that?
Yes, I can. Some love, my friends and family there. Ian McKellen next to me, who co-founded Stonewall with me. The amazing thing about this photograph is it was 4 days after Paul died. And I still look back and I am still astounded that I was able to do it. And so, yeah, it's an amazing photograph. I have to tell you, I don't always wear that outfit, but it is fake ermine. But the House of Lords, and I'll be brief because I know time is of the essence. I never thought I'd say this, but it's the most amazing place to work, and it's so like the European Parliament. Now, why? I can hear people shocked. It's because no one party has a majority. So certainly not since the Labour government got rid of the hereditary lords. So you have to work with other parties. You have to work with other individuals. You have to build up networks, win the argument. And you can. It's quite an exciting place when we revise the law and send it back to the House of Commons to think again on the amendments that we've passed. And also, as I said, I've been there nearly 6 years. I went in, as I said, 4 days after Paul died. And kindness and the support and the understanding that I was shown took my breath away. And I even mentioned it in my maiden speech. And there's Eileen McCarthy there in that brightly coloured dress. She was a member of the European Parliament with me as well. And we've got quite a few ex-commissioners from European commissioners in the Lords and some other MEPs. But photograph that I'm astounded that I'm smiling.
Can I also just add there, Etienne, that for anybody who didn't follow EastEnders and the celebrities of the United Kingdom, like this photograph couldn't be any more jammed packed with TV royalty than if, like, it's ridiculous just how much is in this photograph right now.
You're absolutely right. There's Paul O'Grady, there's June Brown, who plays Dot Carton. She talks like that in the show. And then, of course, wonderful Ian McKellen, Barbara Windsor, who equally in the show, John Reed, Elton John's ex-manager. I could go on and on, but we don't have the time.
Well, for anybody, in terms of royalty, like Buckingham Palace royalty, this is essentially like the Queen and the King of TV right now. Like this is what we've got going on in that photograph. Just if anybody is wondering.
Listen, I have to say, it's the first time I've been called a queen on a broadcast. It's wonderful. But look at that outfit. I must get a longer one next time.
Oh, you look fab.
Okay, just to say that in the question and answers and in the chat, both of you have fans for EastEnders and for the Rose of Tralee. I don't need to mention that. I think you responded already to many questions, including on the same-sex marriage that, as you mentioned, Maria, is not standard in all EU countries, only in some of them. And of course, there are issues with free movement of people that are also linked to that. A final question to both of you. It's difficult not to put the question. We are living in a crisis, which is a pandemia, the coronavirus crisis, with restrictions of freedoms of movements and meetings, but also possibly the rise of fear. I know you are working also on mental health a lot, Maria. On the more positive sides, there might be also ways to find new solidarities in society. Do you see the COVID crisis affecting in a particular way the LGBT community? And what would you comment on that?
Is that to Maria?
Yes, I mentioned Maria, but it's both of you.
Both of us. Michael, do you want to go first?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to come out the other side of this crisis with us all better, with all of us recognizing that what happens to somebody else is as important as if it's happening to me, that we can only solve this problem together. And that all of those people that we have relied on to get us through this have rarely before been given the recognition. Some of these people, outside of some doctors and some other clinicians, most of these people are low paid, most of them are underpaid. And for our benefit and our safety, they've stepped forward. And so I want to come out of this better to one another, individually, locally, globally. I do have concerns, as we saw in South Korea, that communities might be targeted, might be scapegoated, might be blamed. This is the time to reinforce individual human rights. I would argue that we need a Human Rights Commission to run alongside any emergency legislation. And in the United Kingdom, I'm on record in the House of Lords as expressing my concern that the UK government, the Conservative government, has ditched the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which contains rights that we do not have in other conventions which are enforced in this country. And I also have raised my concerns that the government has said it wishes to revise the Human Rights Act. They talked about something called a British Bill of Rights. Makes no sense whatsoever. We could see rights being diluted. But I'm prepared for that fight. But we've got to fight on behalf of one another. As we said earlier at the very beginning, imagine that what's happening to somebody else is happening to you. You wouldn't want it to happen to you or someone you love. And how dare we allow it to happen to somebody else?
Yeah. Following on from that, yeah, I mean, June is predominantly a month of LGBTQI celebration, with Pride's being cancelled. So our month and our protest, our showcase, because of COVID, obviously has made an awful lot of prides turn online, which is great, but equally it's and through no fault of anyone bar this COVID situation, pandemic we find ourselves in now. You know, there's the exclusion of those that might live in remote areas who can't access proper Wi-Fi to connect to prides, or don't have direct access to really expressing themselves. Perhaps they're moving back home with parents who they haven't come out with, so or come out to, or friends that don't really fully understand how to support, and rightly so. You know, we're really in a dark room right now when it comes to trying to get out of this. But again, as Michael had said earlier, we are stronger in this together. What I'd said a few minutes ago about countries making little nuggets of change, and Michael had said around fundamental human rights, we see this in EU countries, we see this around the world. What's happening in the US is not happening in the EU, and I know my English is not great there, but there's little shifts of change and us going backwards. So we have to remain vigilant, and again, not just us. Like if you're a person watching this right now, or will watch it later on, and you know one person who didn't vote in their last elections, regardless of where they are in the world, then it is your duty to ensure that they take the next steps to educate themselves, to ask questions, to contact other groups, and to really look into themselves, that their voice needs to be heard, their vote needs to be counted. And it's so important that we don't miss that now. From a very personal side, I think what COVID and this period of time is giving me, and certainly my team and I are really just trying to push this fact that mental health needs to become a competency of the European Union, and not just shoved off like LGBTQI rights when it's uncomfortable to talk about certain things in the social setting. We need to understand that we cannot talk about a broad church of ideals, and the fact that the European Union was developed to protect citizens, give them opportunity and prosperity, but only on the terms of economic value and not on a social value. It's so important that we find balance here. And I'm really hoping COVID and this time with loved ones, or this time in isolation, is getting people to reconnect with their greatest roots of injustice. And I think we're moving there. I just hope we don't lose people along the way. And again, just one big thing for any prides that are out there, or any upskilling or learns around injustices, just make sure you are connecting that information as widely as you can. And the greatest threat, I think, to many of us in society in particular is assumption. And in Ireland, we have this: assumption makes an ass out of you and me. But just don't assume everybody knows what you know. I said it to Michael when we first chatted a number of weeks ago, that the LGBTQI community members at times can be quite finger pointing and judgmental at those around us. Now's not the time for that. We need to ensure that we are not creating our own divisive language, that we are inclusive, that we are a full rainbow of welcome, for our Black community members, to our Asian community members, to our white members, to our trans members. Most importantly, I say that because in many countries their rights are further back than when you talk about LGBT. So we've a lot of work to do, and that's where I should probably stop myself.
Thank you, Maria. Both of you, we are coming to the end of this nice chat. I would like to thank you, both of you, Michael and Maria, for taking the time for the discussion. And actually, you didn't disagree. You agreed on almost everything. So I would like also to thank the people behind the screen, the many of you that attended. I know that technicalities are not always easy, but it's really a challenge for EPRS to develop these online book talks. And the second, and we are very much growing in audience. I'd like to say also that for the members of parliament and the parliamentary community, the book is available in digital form in the library, so you can borrow it in the library, but of course you can also buy it in your favorite bookshop. For everyone, I would like to draw your attention to the various EPRS publications that are related to gender equality and equality and diversity. The most recent was just published 2 weeks ago. They are available on Europarl and on the EPRS blog and app, which I encourage you to download on your device. A bit of own publicity is always good. I would like also to thank a couple of people. Of course, both of you, I mentioned it, but also Bruno Selin and Cécile Charlier, Mirko Nodari, as well as the IT colleagues that made this possible. Thank you very much to all. The next book talk will be on Monday, the 15th of June, with Julian Jackson on his book on De Gaulle, as we approach the 80th anniversary of the Appel du 18 Juin. It's also something that is connecting the continent with Britain. Many thanks of you. Stay safe. Have a good day. A very last word, Michael.
Yes, I've had a great time. I miss Brussels. I miss you all. We will rejoin the European Union if you have us. And I want to say, more importantly, Maria, on the 11th of June, have a wonderful birthday. You're a
better informed than me.
You're a Gemini, and that's why we get on, because I'm Sagittarius. Well, I think we get on. But I've had a wonderful time, and well, so many friends there. I send my love.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.